Yeah, I don't know. User testing. Well, that's not moving, but at least I got this going. All right. Okay. All right, everybody good to go? I think this page is a 2-hour study session. Let's let you look at the chart. Don't call it a map, it's a chart. Okay. All right, today we're going to talk about a couple of publications that are available, primarily the VFR sectional chart and the chart supplement. Okay, first line talks about maps being representations of the Earth's surface, okay, and its topographic figures, mountains, lakes, hills. Aviation maps include information about man-made features on the ground that you can see from the air, right? The whole purpose of these VFR charts is to be able to help us to navigate VFR using our eyeballs and pilotage. Pilotage meaning we see something on the chart, we see the same thing out in the in front of the airplane. We can navigate using the terrain features and the symbols on the chart as long as we're not lost, right? That's the whole purpose of the charts and the features and the characteristics that we have with those charts. Okay. All right. It says charts are a common tool for VFR navigation. Even if you're using an electronic flight bag for flights, for instance, right? If you have an electronic flight bag, you're going to see charts, right? The flight bag itself isn't helping you to navigate. It's using the chart information and the GPS information on that flight bag to give you the same thing you're seeing on the chart. Okay. There's 37 sectional charts that cover the US. They all have a little bit of an overlap. You can see on your chart panel, if you look at this part of the chart, which chart it is, and other charts that may be adjacent to that section. I think everybody's got a New York section, right? I think they were all New York sectional. It's Washington. Oh, Washington. Okay, so we got both. But the information in them is going to be the same. The only difference between the charts is going to be the location or the ground that you're covering. Okay. They cover the entire continental US. They have an effective date and an expiration date. And I thought it was interesting because VFR sectional charts are good for 56 days. 56 days. Look here, 15 June to 10 August, 56 days. I'm not quite sure where this one came from. 22 June to 7 December. I don't know. I don't know where that picture came from, but they are not 6 months. They're 56 days. What's that? I know it is. You would think 60 days. 50 days. 50 days. About 56. 56. But they do have an effective date and an expiration date. What I was taught, I'm not sure this is true when it comes to regulations, right? You can, you should navigate with current charts. Why does that make sense? Something's going to change, right? If something changes and you're using a 3-year-old chart, could be new obstacles, could be changes in the terrain, anything, right? Anything could have changed. So it's critical that you have the most current and up-to-date charts, whether they're paper or on your flight bag. You should make sure they're updating regularly on your flight bag. You need to make sure you got the current information. I'm going to say this, whether it's true or not, this is what I was taught, and this is what I teach, right? You don't have to have VFR charts in the airplane with you to fly. There's no regulation that says you have to have charts in the airplane. Okay. If you do have charts, they have to be current. Okay. I haven't read a regulation that says if the FAA catches you with outdated charts, they will do anything. Because then again, you don't have to have charts in the cockpit at all. Right. But if somebody says if you're going to have charts in the cockpit, just make sure they're current.
2017, it was every 6 months.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
Okay. Really?
Wow.
Yeah.
That's like,
When did I start taking lessons? I started in 2013. It was 56 days then. I had to buy a chart every 2 months. 56 days. Okay. All right. So Never use an outdated chart. Again, I don't know that there's a regulation, but it's just common sense, right? It's just safety, and making sure you've got the right perspective in the cockpit. They have airports, obstructions, navigational aids, airspace can change from within a 56-day period. When that chart gets published, it may be outdated 2 days later, right? Because things change, but they refresh it on that 56-day cycle to make sure they're trying to keep them as updated as possible. Okay. On the back, if it's folded up, it's got a legend, right? Know it. Know the legend, right? Maybe you won't be tested on every piece of what's on that legend when it comes to the FAA knowledge exam. But when you go to a check ride, that examiner is going to expect that you understand, you fully understand what is on a sectional chart and the symbology that goes along with it. Okay? There's a lot to take in, but it's like anything else, right? The more you look at these things, the more you're going to get comfortable with them. It's going to be second nature to you. Okay. Sectional chart mileage scales. So you can see on the chart as well, it has a scale for nautical miles, statute miles, and kilometers. Virtually everything we're going to do is going to be with nautical miles. Okay. And your plotter is going to have a nautical mile plotter on it. And it's not very clear. It's kind of blurry. But you want to make sure when you're doing your calculation, when you're measuring a distance, okay, if you're going to use statute miles, then you need to make sure you're using miles per hour or some other factor instead of nautical miles and knots, right? Just make sure you're using the right scale for whatever calculation and whatever planning you're doing. Okay. Sectional charts have a scale of 1 to 500,000. What's that mean? Yeah. So what you see on the scale, what you see on the chart, for that 1 inch is actually covering a distance of 500,000 inches. I don't know what that means in statute miles and nautical miles, but it's a lot, right? So sectional charts are a pretty high scale. Okay. We've already talked about the mileage scale, right? Make sure you're using the right scale. Pilotage is what we talk about using the eyeballs. I talked about that already. So when we're in the cockpit and we're navigating by pilotage, if you know where you're going and you've been down that route 20 times, you don't need the chart. You're familiar with the terrain. If you're not familiar with the terrain and the topography and the obstacles or the other landmarks, that sectional chart is what you're going to use to do that pilotage. So when we talk about pilotage, there's two things, and you'll get into this later, I guess. Pilotage and dead reckoning. Pilotage is just using the eyeballs in the chart to see where you're going. Dead reckoning is short for deductive reconciliation. And that's the calculations, right? That's looking at the chart and calculating how far, how fast, how high, all your time and distance and fuel and all that kind of stuff. Making sure you've got the right magnetic heading, you'll do all that for your navigation planning. That's dead reckoning. Straight up pilotage, eyeballs and chart. Looking outside and using the chart. Okay. All right. Not all features on the ground are shown on the chart for obvious reasons, right? It would get really, really ugly. But what's shown on the chart is almost always found on the surface. Should be found on the surface. Now, here's the kicker there, right? What's shown on the chart is assuming a building didn't burn down, right? It's almost always going to be found on the surface. The kicker is that just because it's on the chart doesn't mean you can see it in the air, right? The site picture at 2,000 feet AGL is a whole lot different at 6,000 AGL, right? You may not be able to see that small screen that you were using. You may not be able to see the railroad tracks that you were using or wanted to use at 6,000 feet. So everything is identifiable on the surface with the caveat that you're at a sufficient altitude to be able to see it on the ground. Make sense? Okay. And that becomes, it'll be extremely important when we talk about some of this other stuff and when you do your actual cross-country planning in a couple of weeks. Okay. Who is familiar with topography maps? About half the class? Okay. Okay. So topography is nothing more than saying it's a fancy word to say elevation, right? fancy way to say where are the hills, where are the valleys, what's high, what's low, and how steep is the terrain, okay? Within your chart, you can see there's different colors on the ground, whether it's a light blue or a green, and it gets yellow and brown as you get higher in elevation. So the sectional chart is also, it will give you an indication as to how high that terrain is you're flying over, okay? So contour lines, and in some of these charts, it's hard to see contour lines. But if you look at the chart where you start to see like the brownish color or the tan color, you'll start to see those lines on the chart that are like disfigured circles, right? And the closer you get to the top of the hill, the smaller those circles are. The farther you go out, just like you see here, top of the peak is that little circle. The farther you go down the mountain, the more broad those circles get. But each of those circles indicates a contour line, which is just saying that all of the terrain along that contour line is at the same elevation. Okay, so if you were to walk this contour line around this mountain, you would be staying a few thousand feet. Okay, if you walk this contour line all around the mountain at this level, you're going to stay at 1,500 feet. So a contour line is nothing more than a graphic representation of the elevation for that topography. Make sense? Okay. All right. Normally spaced at 500 feet intervals. Okay. Again, normally. Not always. Depending on the chart, depending on the contours or some of the terrain, they may be spaced a little bit. I don't want to say spaced closer. The contour lines may be smaller intervals. Okay. And that would be typically if you have a relatively flat area, right, where you don't see a lot of hills and mountains. If you continue with a contour line every 500 feet, you may not ever see more than one contour line. Right, that's not a very good indication of what the contour or what that terrain is doing underneath you. Right, so typically it's going to be 500 feet intervals, but in some cases you may see them a little bit less. Okay. All right. The slope of the terrain can be seen by looking at the spacing between those contour lines. Right, if you see, if you look at this, it's not a 3D thing, right? But if you look here, the closer the contour lines are, that means the steeper the terrain, right? You're going from high to low in a relatively short distance. The more spread out they are, the more of a gradient or less of a gradient you have in that slope. Okay, so the contour lines are giving you some indication of how high and how steep that terrain is underneath you. Okay, and I guess that, yeah, this is showing here. But you can see here, when you're at the top, it's the darker color. It extends further out this way, but it's much steeper on the north and south side. All good so far? Okay. And this thing's working, so I'm happy. Okay. Closely spaced contours, rapidly rising terrain. Okay. Farther apart, less precipitous. Same stuff here. This is just showing the similar kind of thing we were just looking at, right? When you see, we talked about the circles, right? The smaller the circles get, the closer you get into the peak, right? The more, the farther out you go, the bigger that circle gets. And when you see rising terrain here and rising terrain here, what does that tell you this is? Yeah, it's a lower level, right? You got two ridges. You got a ridge of climbing terrain here. It goes from tan to yellow to orange, right? That's climbing terrain. Come down the other side, you're going into a valley and then going up another ridge, right? So that's how you interpret the colors. And it's much easier to look at the colors on the sectional chart than it is to try to, find those contour lines, right? Okay. All right. Color talks about the slope or the altitude or elevation, right? On these charts, he was right on the inside of one panel.
bottom of your
This one right here.
There you go, yeah. Right, open up, it's right at the bottom there, it talks about colors and contour. So in these particular cases around here, we've got the contour lines that go up to about 4,050 feet. In this case, now, again, you can see if you look at the color legend on your chart, it goes from like a light green up through the darker tan. That's indicating anywhere from sea level up to 4,050 feet on this chart. Okay. You can see on a different chart, probably out in Colorado, Rocky Mountain area, you've got a much more broad, a more expansive color palette, because you're getting higher altitude. And yeah, this only goes up 4,050. So this is the chart I'm looking at here, it stops there. Right? But that doesn't mean the whole, there's more out there. They just don't put it on the chart because it's not representative of anything in that sector.
What is the bright yellow?
So again,
The bright yellow typically around the airports.
we'll get there. We'll get there. Yeah, that's got nothing to do with the terrain, so, but yeah, we'll get there. Okay, everybody good so far with contour lines, slope, rising terrain? Okay, colors. Light green to higher brown, okay. All right, all good? Going through here. All right, another thing that you're gonna find all over the chart, you're gonna have to look really closely on some of these charts to find these. You're gonna find a little tiny black dot with a number next to it. Okay, that's called a spot elevation. What that basically is saying is if you were standing at that spot, you're going to be at 5,710 feet MSL. Okay, that's giving you a specific elevation for a point on the chart. Okay. In a lot of cases, they will be associated with a peak or a low point, right? The whole purpose of spot elevations are not to tell you when the ground is low, to tell you when the ground is high. Right? Where do you need to be aware that you've got a controlled flight into terrain situation where you're flying at 3,000 feet and somewhere along the way there's a 3,050 foot obstacle. It's not good. That'll put a dent in your health record for that day. Okay, so those spot elevations are specific locations that have that absolute altitude or elevation. Okay, all right. In some cases, you should be able to see them from the air, right? If you're doing your pilotage, you can see that spot elevation 5710, and you're gonna know it's that peak. Not always that easy in the air, but that's what that's for. Okay. All right. If you look at in here. Oh, yes, okay. So critical elevation, I thought they were going the maximum elevation. Critical elevation, so now this is where your eyeball's gotta be good, or a little bit better than, it can be a little bit worse than we were before. There's a little bit bigger black dot on the chart. Okay, if you look close at your chart, every chart is broken into quadrangles. Okay, squares or rectangles with the little hash marks all around them. You'll talk more about those hash marks when you start talking about cross-country planning. That's your longitude and latitude, right? So you're measuring longitude and latitude using those hash lines. But every one of those quadrants has inside of it a critical elevation, which is just a bigger dot, right? But what that is doing is saying within that quadrangle, what is the highest elevation point within that quadrangle? And I don't see it on this one. Maybe you got to call out on the next one. Yeah, here we go. So here, that would be, if that's the critical elevation for this quadrangle, which the whole quadrangle is not shown on the picture, but it's going to be a little bit bigger of a black dot with the same black indication of the elevation of that dot. Okay, that indicates, well, here you can see it. Okay, See how that one's just a little bit bigger than this one? Kind of hard to tell, but it's bigger, right? So that's the critical elevation. That means that is the highest elevation within that quadrangle.
And there's one in every.
There should be one in every quadrangle. Okay? I personally don't. I am recording, so I can say this, but I personally don't care about the critical elevation because there is another elevation figure. Okay? Called the maximum elevation figure. So if you look in that same quadrangle, you're gonna see a blue number with one number that's normally one number that's larger and one number that's smaller. Okay, that's called the maximum elevation figure for that quadrangle. Okay, that represents the highest elevation of terrain and other obstacles within that quadrangle. Right, remember the critical elevation or the spot elevation was just the terrain. Okay, the maximum elevation figure takes into account not only terrain, but artificial and man-made and natural obstacles that are on that terrain. Okay, so when I'm flying, I always want to make sure I'm flying at an altitude well above that altitude MSL. Okay, because that's the important thing, right? You can be flying anywhere in that quadrangle, and as long as you're above that altitude, you're well positioned to be above any obstacles. Not a lot above obstacles, right? But you're above them. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. All right, so everybody understand the maximum elevation figure. Okay, represents the meth in hundreds of feet, with the last two being omitted, right? So in that particular case, 6.7 means 6,700 feet is the altitude or the elevation MSL within that quadrangle. Okay. All right. So in this one, this particular case, the meth is 6,700. It contains the spot elevation, the critical elevation of 6,378. So you know that meth is always going to be at a higher altitude or a higher elevation than that critical or spot elevation. Okay, that's why in my mind, the most important of those three different elevations or marks is that meth. Okay. All right, the meth isn't the minimum altitude you should fly, right? Could you be squeaking by? Maybe. Okay. We say it should be at least 1,000 to 2,000 feet higher than the meth, right? Just for that margin of safety, right? Don't go skirting along at 6,700 feet, you know, betting the odds. Okay, so go to at least 1,000 or 2,000 feet above the meth along your route. Okay, now here's the important part when it comes to your cross-country planning. You're going to be going across many quadrangles, right? So as you plot your cross-country course, you're going to look for any particular areas where you may be able to fly at a lower altitude or have to go up to a higher altitude. Or just choose the worst case and fly the entire course at the higher altitude, right? But that method is extremely important, especially when you're doing cross-country planning. Okay, even more so, what do we not have the advantage of at night? Is that? We can't see anything on the ground, right? So we gotta rely on that maximum elevation figure to keep us above and give us some margin of safety over any obstacles at nighttime. All right, you need to know this, not likely, okay, but it's important to understand how the method is calculated. And the method is calculated differently based on whether that quadrangle's highest point is a man-made obstacle or the highest terrain. Okay, so if the terrain is the higher of the points in that quadrangle, the method is calculated one way. If the highest point within a quadrangle is a man-made obstacle, then it's calculated differently. So all this is doing is telling you, okay, determine the elevation of the top of the obstacle, MSL. Okay, add a vertical error, 100 feet, or half the contour interval. Okay, you're not doing this on the fly, right? This is all done for you. That's why it's on the chart. Okay, then they add a buffer rounding up to the next highest 100 feet. Okay, so they're built, yeah, go ahead.
So near Philadelphia, there's all those really tall towers on the Schuylkill. So would that be the maximum elevation there?
Could be, who's got a Washington sectional? Is Philly on there? You got a Philly pack?
Yeah.
Okay. So if you look right around Philly, or you're talking, that's out around, it's Google, right? You're talking about that area? Yeah. It's quite likely that's gonna be the highest obstacle, but I don't know right offhand. Okay,
I think it's.
yeah, it's right there near Manayunk and all those radio towers, right?
Yeah.
What's the meth in that quadrangle?
7.
1,700? Okay.
Yeah.
So it's most likely it's gonna be those towers. Okay, so that's how you do it when the terrain is the highest point. It's a little bit different when you've got a natural or man-made feature in at that elevation. Again, you're gonna determine the elevation of the feature, add the vertical error to the source above the figure. Again, it's just a margin of error that they build in, 100 feet or half the contour interval, and add 200 feet just in case that obstacle is changed. Right, so again, they're putting a little bit of a buffer on there, adding another 200 feet and rounding up to the next 100 feet. Okay, so theoretically, could you fly at that maximum elevation figure and be safe? Safe's a loosey-goosey word there, right? Yes, they design it that way, but always give yourself that additional margin of error. Give yourself 1,000 feet. Not only is it safer, but it's just better view, right, of everything. Of the landscape, of the horizon, it's all better. Okay, any questions on the map? So we got critical or spot elevations, critical elevations, and map. Right? All right, this is just an example how they were doing it. Round up to 13,500. Okay. All right, different kinds of obstacles you're gonna see. And again, these are in every chart. I don't care where you look on your chart, you're gonna see obstacles like this. If you see a triangle, looks like a TP with a dot in the middle of it, that is representing an obstacle that is less than 100 feet AGL or 1,000 feet AGL. Okay? So anything up to 1,000 feet, any radio tower, any building up to 1,000 feet is going to be shown as an obstacle up to that looks like the TP. Okay. The bold number, you're going to see two numbers next to that obstacle. The bold number on top represents the height of the obstacle, or not the height, I'll call it the elevation. The elevation of the top of the obstacle above sea level, right? So this is going to be 630, the top of this obstacle is 632 feet MSL. Okay, so that's the key number. The bottom number in the parentheses is essentially the height of the obstacle above ground level. Okay, so if you're flying along at 632 feet, when you hit that, you're going to fall 302 feet to the ground. Okay, that's the way to look at it. That's the altitude or the elevation of the top of it and how far it is to the ground from the top. Okay, two numbers. Okay, first number is MSL, second number is AGL. Okay, so how do you find the height of the obstacle itself? Subtract one from the other. Okay, give you an idea of how high that obstacle is. Okay, second type are any obstacles that are greater than 1,000 feet. Okay, they're shown in a more elongated, tower-looking type symbol. Okay, they look more like the Eiffel Tower when you get over 1,000 feet. Okay, the numbers are no different. First number is the top of the obstacle, MSL. The bottom is how far or how high it is above AGL. Okay, and you can see on this particular one where they've got the arrow on the right side, you see the emission, the rays, right? That means that there's on the top of that obstacle is lighting, typically strobe lighting that goes along with that obstacle. So now you know if you're flying at night, you're not only looking at the meth, you've got some indication, you know that you're gonna be looking for some of those higher obstacles with the flashing lights. Weird. Sometimes I gotta go backwards to go forwards. All right, I'll take it. Okay, the letters UC. If you see UC, it's gonna mean that that obstacle is still under construction. Okay, which only means beware that the numbers that are displayed with that obstacle may not be 100% accurate. Okay, that may be numbers at the time the chart is printed, but if it's under construction, it could be higher, it could be lower, right? So under construction is just an indication to you, just beware. All right. So now let's talk about a couple of things that we talked about. I mentioned briefly earlier, sometimes when you're high versus low, much easier and much more difficult to see different things on the ground. So we got all those things represented on the chart. They're all on the ground somewhere, but are they going to work? Roads are relatively easy to identify from the air, right? What kind of road, right? It's gonna be a whole lot easier to see Route 95 going north and south than it is to see in some parts, maybe Route 1 or Route 3 cutting through Philadelphia and the main line. Okay, so roads are great again, but the higher you get, sometimes it's more difficult to see certain roads that are on the chart, harder to see from the air. Okay, some of the roads you will see if you look really closely, and more so on a tack chart, which we'll get to in a minute, will actually list the route number, right? Route 76. You can see it cutting across Pennsylvania. You'll see the turnpike Route 76 sign or symbol on the chart. So that's one way to know specifically what road you're looking at or looking for. Okay. Railroad tracks, there we go. It's only a one-liner. Relatively easy to identify at low altitudes, right? If you're not at a low altitude and the tracks are not cut through a tree line, right? You can't, it's gonna be harder to identify just a set of tracks in the ground. Much more than it is if it's cut through power lines or transmission lines. Right here, that's what we're showing, right? You may not be able to see this from the air unless it's clearly associated with cutting through a tree line and power line breaks. Okay, so again, beware. When you do your cross-country planning, these are the kind of things you need to look at on the chart and say, okay, my math tells me I've got to be at 5,000 feet. Maybe not a good idea to pick a smaller road or a power line or a railroad track as a navigation point, right? It's just your thought process when you're doing your cross-country planning. Okay. There's the right of way being cleared, right? Water. Water is typically a great navigation point if it's the right body of water. Again, you will see smaller rivers on the chart, not easily identifiable from the air. One thing I've noticed a lot, if I try to look at or try to look for a waterway, what's quite often around a smaller waterway that obstructs it? Huh? No. Trees, right? All you see from the air is trees. They're grown over, so you can't see that waterway. If it's a large river, absolutely. If it's a smaller river that may be overgrown, you may not see that again from 5,000 feet. Just keep that in mind as you're going through. Shorelines are great. Obviously, you're going to see a shoreline. Larger bodies of water. If you're looking for specific lakes, right? If you go from here up towards the Poconos, you see what's called Lake Nakamixon. Huge. You can see that forever, right? That's a huge navigation point, right? Very easily identifiable from the air. It's on the chart. You can pick it out in the air, but not so for every body of water. Okay. Again, just keep that in mind. Oh. Right. Small rivers or streams, difficult. Use the larger body. We already talked about that. Okay. Here we go. Yellow areas. Listen up. This is for you.
Yeah.
I'm going to stop here for you. Okay. All right. The yellow areas
You only got
indicate,
5 minutes.
what's that?
You only got 5 minutes.
Oh, you're watching. Okay, so you got your points back. All right, yellow indicates populated area, right? So when you see a populated area or a yellow area on the chart, you can identify that. It typically will help you identify that from the air, right? Oh, I can see Philadelphia, right? I'm coming up on all the buildings. That's a hugely populated area. A smaller town. You can see that when you're at a higher altitude, right? You can still see a populated area on the ground. So that yellow is indicative of a populated area. Could be small, could be large, and it's gonna follow the shape of what it looks like on the ground, generally. Okay. One other thing this does, when they do it in yellow, what it closely aligns to, again, nothing's perfect, right? But it closely aligns to what that area may look like at night. Okay, when you're in the air at night, you're going to see the lights, and that's what you're gonna see. That yellow is used for essentially a lit up area at night. Okay. So again, a very easy, you're going from here to Millville, okay, in the middle of the night. I think there's one small town, like direct line from here to Millville. But you can see it, right? So it's an okay navigation point at night. So that's the purpose of the yellow. Okay? All good? Let's see what else we got here. Yeah.
So on VFR, but I'm still at some basic GPS. Very simple, we're just gonna point out roads and rivers. and
Wait, say your question again, start over.
So I'm VFR.
Yeah.
right? But I'm gonna have a basic GPS.
Are you?
I would bring my own, right?
Okay, okay.
I would have.
Not every plane has it, so that's what I want to make sure. Right, yeah.
So like I would look to have kind of a backup.
Yeah.
Say, okay, I'm over 76.
Yep.
Or I'm near Marsh Creek Lake.
Yep.
Right?
Yep, yep. Yeah, and when I mentioned, like the flight bags, right? So this is an important point, is that if you have a flight bag in the airplane with you, right? And you've got your charts on your leg, and you've got GPS on your leg, that is not, it may not be used for navigation. Okay, you can't rely on that handheld GPS for navigation. You can use it for situational awareness, right? It's a distinct, or it's a subtle difference, right? You're gonna look down and say, oh yeah, oh, I see it, but you can't rely on that for navigation. Okay, it's all just for situational awareness. If you've got it panel mounted, it's integrated, and the database is up to date within that GPS unit on the plane, then yes, you can use it for situational awareness. It's more reliable. But again, when you're VFR, what's the regulation? What are we flying under? Eyes, right? Right. You can always use the GPS for situational awareness, but at the end of the day, if you don't see something, it's on you as a VFR pilot. Okay. Jackie?
So I was thinking that this was gonna be more of the reference for flying over congested areas versus not, with the regulation being 500. You have to be at least 500 feet for non-congested areas. This is for these yellow areas.
No, that's not an indication whether it's congested or not, right? So you may be able to say, look, okay, if you see, maybe it's on another slide, I think there's another, yeah, here. There's a town that's indicated with just a dot. So you may be able to assume that's not a very congested area.
Yeah.
As so much as something that would be shown in yellow, which may have more homes or more buildings or more congestion. When we talk about that rule or the regulation, 500, 1,000 feet, it's kind of a fuzzy rule, right? Congested area or non-congested area, right? So.
It's like that 2,000 feet.
Yeah. Of course, I'm 2,000 feet away.
Yeah,
The answer to the examiner is yes, I'm more than 2,000 feet away from that cloud, sir.
got it.
All right, so that's what we're seeing on the chart. So again, when you're at a higher altitude, you may be able to see some of those yellow towns or cities, right? But not so much. You may not be able to see if this is a very, very small town with just a few buildings. So again, things you need to think about as you do your plan. All right. What else we got? Airports. Do not be fooled, okay? Best VFR reporting points. Not true. Not true. I will tell you right now, if I tell you to fly from here to Lancaster, and en route, I say, find and point out Smoketown. Are you a pilot, sir?
Yeah.
Yeah, you ever fly to Lancaster looking for Smoketown Airport?
Anytime.
Yeah, yeah. It's impossible to see Smoketown unless you've been there many times, right? So saying that VFR, or every airport, just because it's on a chart, is a good reporting point, not the case, right? The bigger the airport, absolutely. Philly, Wilmington, Baltimore, DC, they're gonna be quite obvious. Places like Reading, Lancaster, if you're looking at your chart and the chart supplement, where you know that the airport is about 3 miles to the northwest of the town, that will give you a good indication of where to look for a Reading or a Lancaster, and you can find it much easier. But the smaller airports are not good places to use or good things to use as VFR checkpoints or reporting points. Okay, keep that in mind. Just because they're on the chart doesn't mean they're easy to see. Okay. Magenta colored airports. We talked about this a little bit, I think, the other day. Magenta, no tower. Okay. Blue, have a tower. But is the tower always operational? No. How do we know what the operating hours are? Huh? Chart what? Chart supplement, there you go. Yep, in the chart supplement, okay? So it may be listed as blue, but it may not always have an operating control tower. Okay. Recognizable runways are shown within the airport symbol. So essentially, this is showing you for that airport, it's non-towered. But generally, you're gonna be looking, if you're looking for that airport in the air, you're generally gonna be looking for a north-south running runway. Okay? Same with, if it's towered or untowered, if there's multiple runways, you'll see a general indication of the multiple runways that are associated with it. If we were looking at Lancaster, we would see one coming this way and one going that way, intersecting, right? If we're looking at, over here, next slide. If they're more than 8,096 feet, and he's gonna look at me and say, why 8,096 feet? I have no idea, but that's the magic number. If an airport is more than 8,069 feet, I'm sorry, 8,069 feet, it's gonna be identified not by a circle, but by an actual, looks like a runway designation, okay? So the larger airports with longer runways, you're gonna see not in a circle, but you're gonna see the actual runway configuration. All good? Okay, and you are gonna see, I don't think you're gonna see this in purple, but notice the color. They're blue because they have a control tower. Okay. All right. Okay. An airport has a dark circle within the runways. Yeah, that's what we just talked about. The dark circle with something less than 8,000 feet, but longer than 1,500, it's got the little line, right? It's got the little indication in there. All right, that's what I already covered. If it's a soft surface or shorter than 1,500 foot runway, it's just going to be an open circle. Okay. That's an indication that this is either a grass runway or something less than 1,500 feet long runway. Okay. You're going to see a lot of them on most of the charts, especially in this area. There are a whole lot of private airfields or smaller airfields and grass strips. Okay. I'm good so far? All right. Military airports shown by a double circle. I don't consider it a double circle. It is a double circle, but it's like a donut. Okay, you're gonna see a military airport is gonna look like a donut. All right, the open dot. If you look real close, you see a little little white dot there, right in the middle of that airport. That's an indication that there is a VOR, a VOR facility in that, at that airport. Okay, what does VOR mean? I'll teach you that Tuesday. Okay, VORs are ground reference or ground-based navigation facilities, so we'll talk about them. But if you see a dot, that means there is a navigational facility with a VOR tower or signal at that airport. Okay. If you see airports that have the four, we call them protrusions, okay, sticking out around the four, that just means that airport has specific services. It may have fuel, it may have maintenance facilities, it may have oxygen, it may have other things that are available at that airport during certain hours when the airport is functioning or when people are working it, right? So where are we gonna find out when that airport in the middle has those services available? Huh?
Chart supplement.
Chart supplement. 98% of the time, gang, the answer is chart supplement, right? Okay? All right, so chart supplement is gonna tell you, if you see an airport that's got those protrusions, look it up in the chart supplement to see what service is available. Okay? A star. Oh, there. What is the star mean on the top of that middle airport? Say again? Beacon, rotating beacon at that facility. So whether it's IFR conditions or nighttime, you can be looking for that beacon again as a navigation aid to get to the airport. You'll be looking for the rotating beacon. Okay. All right. Some airports are restricted. Okay, as with other things, right? If you see something that has a R, okay, that means it's a restricted field. That means that you can't land there unless you have explicit permission from the owner or the controlling authority to land there, except when an emergency, right? Okay. All right, if you have an emergency, you can land there. Otherwise, you need special authority and permission to land there. Okay. If they have soft surface runways less than 1,500 feet, it's just a circle, right? Okay. Private, if they're not for public use, it's handled the same way as a restricted airport is. You need permission from the owner to go there, but it's private, not just restricted. Okay. All right, when we look at the chart, this is where we start to look at the details for an airport and what is the chart? You didn't stop me, dude.
You were on a roll.
Oh, all right. Go. Take 5.
Hold on.
All right, ready? Picking up with airport data. So when we look at the chart, we talked about what an airport looks like on the chart. Now, when you look closely, you're gonna see a block of data. You'll see a block of data affiliated with that runway or that airport, okay? What are we looking at? The official airport name is above the control tower frequency. So in the one they're showing here on the right, Chico Airport is the name of the airport, Chico. CIC in the parentheses is the ICAO identifier for the airport. So KCIC, the K is omitted. So airport KCIC is Chico. Right underneath there, you see CT, the control tower frequency is 121.0. Okay, also as a CTAF, there's this little C next to it. So when the tower is not operational, it's a CTAF frequency. Underneath that, line 3, you see where it says AWAS 3 and a frequency. That's your weather channel. You guys did all the weather stuff and weather products, right? So Chico has an AWAS 3 automated weather observation system. Yes, sir.
The little star right next to it comes right there, that is part time.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So the star, thanks for pointing that out. The star next to the frequency means it's not, the tower is not operational full time. Where do you go to find out the hours? Start supplement. Okay. All right, underneath the AWAS frequency, you see 238. What do we think 238 is? this thing. No, see, you shouldn't have made me take a break. Oh, working on here. Great. That's not helping me at all. Nope. Now, what changed? All right, hang on, I'm not getting anything here.
So 238, would that be elevation of the airport?
That's correct. I can't even get it to advance using the mouse. All right, now we might be cooking. All right, last line starts with the airport's elevation. Okay, MSL elevation for the airport of 261 feet. Chico is 238 feet. The L means that there's lighting available from sunrise or sunset to sunrise. And what else? What do we see by the L? They don't have it on here. If you see a star next to the L, what does that mean? I think we talked about that before. Is that pilot operated or something special about the lights that you need to look at in the chart supplement? Okay. Next to the lighting symbol is the number 67 for Chico on the right hand side. That just means you're going to see there the length of the longest runway in hundreds of feet. Okay, so in this particular case, Chico, the longest runway at Chico is 6,700 feet. Okay, if there's multiple runways, it's only going to indicate the length of the longest runway at that facility. Okay, and then next to that is the frequency Unicom. Okay, now underneath, I don't know if this goes into it, does it? Yeah, it does. Okay. Underneath, you see RP. We talked about this when we were talking about the regulations and patterns, right? And airport operations. You see a RP on the chart. What's that mean? Right pattern, right? So you immediately know that you need to make sure you're flying a right pattern. And if there's multiple runways, you need to know it's runway 13 left. Okay, so it's telling you when there's multiple runways, which runway are you using right pattern for? And 13 right in this case. Okay. In the absence of that, where else need that information? Guard supplement. Guard supplement. Okay. All right. Unicom stations. We talked about Unicoms quite some time ago, I think, and we talked about their typically at non-towered airports for informational services. Like you can call the Unicom, you can call it here. You could consider signature flight services in the main building as a Unicom frequency, really the same frequency as we have for common traffic advisory, et cetera, et cetera. But that's going to tell you what frequency you can use for Unicom communications with the facility.
Unicom will talk to the FBO, where
I'm sorry?
the Unicom will talk to that.
Could be the FBO, yeah. If you call the Unicom here, you're talking to Signature Flight Services, the FBO. All right, I'm back to using the mouse. Awesome. Awesome. All right. Typical airport data for a non-towered airport, you're going to see much less on the chart for a non-towered airport. You're going to see the name of it. You're going to see the ICAO identifier, right? Yucca Valley, Lima 22. You're going to see the elevation, 3,224. The star with the L for the lighting. One runway, 4,300 feet. And the common frequency, 123.0. Okay, and that also has a right pattern identifier. So that chart, if you're tooling along and you have an emergency situation and you've got your chart in your lap and you know you've identified this airport, you want to land there, you can get everything you need for an emergency right off that chart. The general orientation of the runway is in the airport diagram or the airport symbol. You can see what the length of the runway is it sufficient for yourself? What's the altitude and who you need to call? You're going to be coming into that path. Everything's right on the chart. Okay. All right. Yeah, so the L, again, if it's a star, you're gonna look, because the runway lights may be pilot controlled at night. Anything that has to do with special considerations for lighting are gonna be in that chart supplement. They call it the DCS, the digital chart supplement. You can get the hand, you can shell out the money and have the hard copy one too. Right? All right. Victor Airways. Okay, we talked about military airways and training routes and all that kind of stuff. On the chart, this is a terrible diagram to talk about Victor Airways, because there's really only one that I could find all the way in the bottom right, Victor 460-514. But a Victor Airway is typically a navigational route that you can fly, and those routes indicate a flyway or an airway, typically connecting two VORs, right? So back in the old days, when we didn't have GPS and we navigated VOR to VOR, we could navigate from one VOR to another and know that we were flying on Victor 460, okay, either easterly or westerly. In this case, it shows the 076 degree radial or heading. Okay, so that's what the Victor Airways are. Okay, a square box, and this is what I could not find here. I had to look on the chart. You can see on the chart if there's a square box with a number inside the airway, somewhere along that airway, maybe a small box with a number in it. That just means what's the distance in nautical miles on that airway that's going from VOR1 to VOR2, right? So just another quick reference to say, hey, I'm on this airway. How far is it from point A to point B? Oh, there's one. I just saw it. How about that? I looked at this thing for an hour this morning. Victor 317 is 16 miles on Victor 317 between the two VORs that it's connecting. Okay, that's what we're looking at. Okay. All right, so you can look at this. I don't know if this is an actual copy of a real chart, but they got everything on a couple of quadrangles here. Okay. Different type of airborne vehicle symbols. What does that mean? If you see any of these symbols, you just need to be aware that in this general vicinity, you may encounter this kind of activity, right? Number one, just looks like a glider. It's got the G in it. So you can expect that there's probably a high volume of glider activity or glider training in that area. Two, hang gliders. Same symbol as the glider, so it's got an H instead of the G. Okay. Unmanned aerial vehicles up in there in the top right. Same symbol, UA. Okay, so you may encounter high volumes of UAS activity in that area. Four, parachute. We have a number of areas in a number of places in this general vicinity that have parachute operations. You would see that on the chart. Okay, where is number four? Down at the very bottom. It's just a parachute symbol. Okay. Number five, ultralights, same symbol, just a U. Aerobatic practice areas, number 6 with an A. 7, space launch activities, top right. Oh, it's a little different. We got a rocket there. Okay, so if you see a rocket, you know there's probably some volume of space activity in that area. You would see that probably down like around Wallops Island, Gasatee, Eastern Shore. Okay. Number 8 is showing an interim stadium TFR. It's not really showing a TFR, but you can see number 8 has a diamond. Okay. That's indicating that there's a stadium there. And what you're typically going to see for larger stadiums, for large raceways like Indianapolis or Mount Pocono, when there are events going on at those facilities, Lincoln Financial Field, Citizens Bank Park, there will be a temporary TFR for the duration of that event that encompasses that area. Okay, so again, we talked about pop-up TFRs. If you're gonna be out flying, they're the kind of things you need to make sure you're aware of. Oh, the Phillies playing today, stay away from there. That's the middle of Class B airspace, don't go there. You get the idea. Okay, any questions on those symbols? Yeah.
But, so commercial airlines have an automatic exception, because I've come in many times, fly right by.
That's different, yeah. They're on an IFR flight plan, so they're cleared to go through the TFR. And typically, I'm not even gonna try to guess. I wanna say it's only like a 3 nautical mile diameter up to 1,800 feet or something like that. It's not a huge TFR. It's when you look at the chart or on the map, you're gonna see it's a very small area around that stadium that's got a TFR associated with it. Okay, so it's not like a presidential TFR. Yeah,
The unmanned, I guess, is drones, and the question is how high those things can go, and do they carry a transponder? Because we're not going to see this kind of thing.
we'll see what.
Number 3.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, no, you're not gonna see them, right? So theoretically, unmanned aerial vehicles, now, you know, if we're talking about recreational stuff, they shouldn't be flying more than 400 feet AGL, period. Okay, so that should be a built-in safety factor, but I will tell you, I was coming back from Reading. This is probably a year ago, maybe a little over a year ago. I was coming back from Reading. We had just taken off, we had climbed, we were at 2,500 feet coming back here. And just out of nowhere, 2 drones just zipped right by the front of my airplane. I was with a student. So that was 2,500 feet in the air, right? So you think about the range that they have, they can be a mile and a half away from their controller. So should they have been there? No, and that's dangerous as hell. Right? There's no doubt about it. What's that? They were small. They were the smaller recreational, under 55 pound. Yeah. You know, if you blink, you wouldn't have seen them. We just happened to see them just flash right by the link screen. So, yeah, so they'll be out there. Yeah.
So what's the square box right above the figure 41? Yeah, there's the circle and that, which is the,
Above the figure 41.
yeah, so there,
Black box.
Help me. Not sure where it is. Oh, there.
yeah. I try to find reference for it, so that's why I asked you.
I don't know. There should be something in it. You know what? You can find it.
Probably a building.
You've got the manual, right? Yeah, it could be a building, could be a tower. Actually, you know, it's indicated here.
Oh, the towers, yeah, towers.
It's got the graphic. But yeah, and right next to it is that spot altitude. Okay,
Critical, was that critical?
I'd have to be able to see,
Or is it?
no, because if you look up, you see 38, 36. That's just a spot elevation, same size. Okay. It's a glider for everything except for the spaceship. Yeah. So you have to look within the diamond to see what kind of activity it's gonna be. Okay. You can see on this one, it's shown, it's again, it's not huge, but you can see it a little bit. You know what? Look at that. That part of it works. If you look here. That's because I'm not on the same slide. It would help if I was in the right slide, okay? You look here, you see the square box or the rectangular box with the dots inside it. That indicates a national wildlife area. Can you fly there? Yeah, but they prefer that you don't. They prefer that you fly at least 2,000 feet AGL above them, just for preservation of the wildlife. Okay, so you're gonna see them in multiple areas. They're asking you to just avoid that area. Okay. VFR checkpoints. Okay, so when you look, and sometimes these are hard to find, especially in a chart that's extremely congested, but you see a number of purple flags. I can't use it to advance the slide. I might as well have fun. Right? You look here, you see a purple flag here, a purple flag here, purple flag here, and you see some text around it, text next to it. That's called a VFR reporting point or VFR checkpoint. Okay, it's essentially something that's relatively identifiable from the air that you can use reliably for your navigation. Or ATC may request that you say, let me know when you're over checkpoint Satakoy or Satakoy Bridge, right? You can easily identify that and report in a VFR situation when you're at that checkpoint. Okay, you see underneath it, you've got, you've got the name of it, and underneath you see some weird acronym, right? It's a 5-character line or string. Okay, what that indicates is if you're flying with a GPS unit, that is the GPS identifier for that checkpoint. So you can use that navigation point, that VFR checkpoint or waypoint in your navigation planning in your GPS. You can enter it as one of your waypoints and specifically fly to that point. Okay, if it doesn't have that parenthetical list of or characters, it's a VFR checkpoint, but you can't use it for GPS navigation. Okay. Ooh, I'm working again. All right. And this is what we just talked about. They're co-located with GPS waypoints, and you're able to just plug them in using your 5-digit identifier. Okay, and you can see in that particular case, they've put BPLQM as a navigation point in their GPS. They're navigating to that waypoint. Okay, so just another thing that you can use if you have the advantage of GPS in your system, in your plane. Okay. All right, these are sectional charts, VFR sectional charts, VFR pack charts, terminal area charts. Little bit different, but much the same information. All we're doing in this case is we're looking at a smaller subset of the area from a sectional chart and blowing it up, right? And these terminal area charts are near what you would obviously around terminals, larger terminal airports. So if you look at, if you have a DC or a Washington or DC chart, you can see this white line, this white border is on the sectional chart, right? And that will indicate that there is a terminal area chart associated with that area. So you can take the terminal area chart and see that square from the sectional chart blown up, much bigger, much more detail. Okay, it's a little bit better to use when you're near a terminal area. Okay. All right. We talked about the sectional chart being 1 to 500,000, half that. Okay, so the TAC chart brings it within half the distance, half the scale. Okay, 1 to 250,000 gives you a much crisper view of what's in that area, and therefore you may see things on the TAC chart that aren't indicated on the sectional chart. Right, you have more real estate, you've got the availability. In most cases, if you're flying with a TAC chart, you may be navigating closer to the ground because you're approaching that airport, right? So just because, again, things are indicated on a TAC chart doesn't mean they're easily identified or identifiable from a higher altitude, right? It just gives you more detail in that size chart. Okay. All right, and again, they won't be with every airport. They're with the larger terminals, and you'll see them. Okay, I think this is the last, one more slide. We're doing good tonight. The chart supplement. I talked so much about the chart supplement, and I only get one slide. That's it. Okay, so the chart supplement changes also every 56 days in conjunction with, it may not be the exact timeline as the VFR charts, but it has a 56-day cycle to update all of the information within that that guide. The chart supplement in this form is area, again, area dependent. If you look at the back or actually look at the front, it will show you what states that chart supplement will cover. And it goes through, when you look at the front part of it, it's by state, alphabetically by town within that state. Okay, so you said you were a pilot. You ever fly to New Garden?
Yeah.
Many times, right?
Yeah, but that- isn't that what they used to be called the airport facility director?
Yes, it used to be called the Airport Facility Directory. They thought they changed up and called it the chart supplement now. Yes, sir. You and I both were old timers. We did the AFD. Yeah. But, when I was in the airplane with, it wasn't my instructor, it was, and it wasn't the FAA examiner, but it was another instructor getting me ready for a ride. He said, okay, we were in the air. He said, take me to New Garden. Everybody, well, most people know New Garden is near Kennett Square, right? So I pulled out, I'm flying, right? And this was old days. I had the paper book, I had the book in my hand. I'm in Pennsylvania, I'm New Garden, New Garden, New Garden, New Garden. There's no freaking airport in New Garden. It's in Kenneman. T-O-U-G-H-T-A-N-N-A-M or whatever. That's the town. Who's never heard of Kenneman? But so I couldn't find it in the chart supplement. So the chart supplement is great, but you gotta know what town the airport is associated with. But it's by state, alphabetically by town, and then with the airports within that town. Okay? All right. We'll take a couple of seconds to run through this, but the top part, couple of primary pieces of identification. The town, the name the name of the airport and the identifier, ART, KART being the ICAO identifier. 5W, okay, for this one. What that means is that this airport is 5 miles west of the town that it's associated with in the chart supplement. So it would be 5 miles west of, doesn't even have the airport, or it doesn't have the town that it's affiliated with. Is that it?
Yeah.
Jordan? So it would say, okay, if you're in the air and you can see the town of Watertown from the air, look 5 miles to the west, you should see the airport, right? So the 5W means 5 miles west, tells you what time zone is that particular airport in, whether it's standard or daylight savings time, gives you the latitude and longitude coordinates. The next row gives you the field elevation, just like you would see on the chart itself. Field elevation, skip the B, skip the AOE. There's AOE means airport of entry. That's for customs integration stuff.
What's the B?
Okay, I'm sorry.
Do you know what the B?
I don't know what the B is. Yeah, and they skip that here. So if you look in the chart supplement,
Yeah.
tell me. There is a legend in there in the beginning of the chart supplement. There's a legend that tells you what everything is. Yeah. And then you get to that might be what we're looking at here. Oh, the only other thing they've indicated here is the Mon Airport. All the way in the bottom or the far right of the second line, a Mon Airport means that that airport can be navigated to by VORs in the new minimum operational network of VOR facilities. Probably talk about that a little bit more next week and teach you about VOR. But this is a Mon Airport. Okay. It's got runway info. There's a lot of stuff on here that I don't want to say you can ignore. It's important information, but typically when you look here, it's got the runway information for the 2 runways we've got. It's got what kind of lighting for glide slope do we have there? What's the length of the runway? What kind of runway is it? Is it grass? Is it asphalt? Is it concrete? As you recall, give me a list there. So anything you need to know about that runway itself is there. When you get down to the declared distance information, this is a lot more useful for the bigger guys. That's telling you what's for runway 7, takeoff runway available, almost 5,000 feet. Takeoff distance available, the same, because sometimes we know the full length of the runway can't be used for takeoff, right? So takeoff runway, takeoff distance. I don't know what ASDA is, and then LDA is landing distance available. So in some of those cases, you would be more concerned if you were a larger aircraft, but it's good information to know that you're gonna have enough runway to either take off or land with your aircraft. Okay, then that whole middle part where it talks about airport remarks, all just good to know stuff, right? That's all free-form text. What's important to know about that particular airport? When is it attended? Can you expect deer? Who should you contact if you have any kind of questions? There's a lot of that's going to be packed into that remarks section. And then the bottom starts to talk about your communications frequencies, navigational aids, and everything else that's associated with that airport. So every airport in that chart supplement can have that same format. Some may be much more compact because there's less information, but it's always gonna be that same flow of information for every airport. Okay? All right, this is all stuff we talked about. Oh, look at that. All right. Star RP. Anytime you see an asterisk, what does it mean? Something special, right?
Yeah.
Okay, certain times, okay? All right, what gives the most detail? We only talked about two kinds. All right. What's a flag light symbol at Stanford Stadium? What does that mean? VFR checkpoint, right? And in general, you're not gonna see every stadium listed with a flag as a VFR checkpoint. But again, a stadium is a pretty darn good VFR waypoint, even without the flag. They're pretty identifiable.
So B indicates a rotating light beacon.
There you go. Light beacon. Sectional charts are good for how long? All right. Fuel, where are we gonna find out about the type of fuel that's offered? 85% of the time, chart supplement. And I think. One more, maybe more. Destin Executive, so Destin Executive is this the airport? You're looking for it? The magenta, okay? Okay, first of all, tell me about Destin. What is it, towered, non-towered? Why? Magenta, good, non-towered airport. So what's the length of the longest runway? Okay, right in the middle of that bottom row, 5,000 feet. Okay. And that's it. Questions?